The air in Courtroom 4 of the Fort Sheridan Judicial Center was thick with the sterile scent of floor polish and the heavier weight of judgment. It was a place of rigid lines and unforgiving angles, from the polished oak of the judge's bench to the precise folds of the American flag standing sentinel in the corner. In this arena of absolutes, Samuel Thorne was an anomaly. A man of faded edges and quiet sorrows, he stood before the bench in a worn tweed jacket, his hands, gnarled by age and labor, clasped behind his back. He was the courthouse janitor, accused of trespassing in the records archive after hours. A simple matter, a minor infraction, yet the prosecutor, Captain Daniel Evans, was turning it into a spectacle. Evans was everything Samuel was not: young, sharp, his uniform a testament to ambition, his voice a blade cutting through the silence. He wasn't just prosecuting a trespass, he was prosecuting a perceived stain on the institution he revered. He circled the defendant's table, his gaze fixed not on Samuel's face, but on a small, dark glint of metal peeking from beneath the lapel of the old man's jacket. It was a flicker of deep blue ribbon and tarnished silver, a shape Evans knew with the certainty of a zealot. He stopped, a predator that had scented weakness, and the entire room leaned forward in anticipation. Captain Evans pointed a perfectly manicured finger, his voice ringing with theatrical indignation. "Your Honor, I would like to call the court's attention to an object the defendant is attempting to conceal." The murmurs started then, a low rustle of whispers from the gallery, a place of off-duty personnel and military spouses. All eyes followed his finger to the small, almost hidden object. Samuel Thorne did not flinch. His gaze remained fixed on the seal of the United States Army carved into the wood above the judge's head. He seemed a man carved from stone, a forgotten monument in a forgotten corner of the world. "Mr. Thorne," Evans continued, his voice dripping with condescension, "is wearing a decoration. Specifically, the Distinguished Service Cross." He let the name hang in the air, a sacred thing being profaned. "A medal, Your Honor, second only to the Medal of Honor. Awarded for extraordinary heroism. Yet, this man, a janitor, stands before us on a criminal charge, wearing a symbol he could not possibly have earned. This is more than a simple trespass. This is an act of stolen valor. An insult to every man and woman who has ever worn the uniform of this nation." The accusation landed with the force of a physical blow. The whispers in the gallery grew louder, tinged with anger. Samuel's shoulders, already stooped, seemed to sink another inch, not in shame, but as if bracing against a familiar storm. He remained silent, his quiet dignity a stark, infuriating contrast to the prosecutor's righteous fury. Judge Advocate Colonel Marcus Holloway presided, a man whose face seemed etched by the thousands of difficult decisions he'd made over a 30-year career. He peered down from his elevated perch, his expression unreadable. He had seen every form of human failing, but this was a particularly ugly one. He disliked Evans's showmanship, but the core of the accusation was serious. "Mr. Thorne," the judge's voice was a low rumble, a sound that commanded attention without needing to be raised. "The captain raises a grave point. Can you explain the medal you are wearing?" Samuel's eyes finally shifted, moving from the seal to the judge's face. There was no fear in them, only a profound weariness. His voice, when it came, was soft, raspy from disuse. "It was given to me, Your Honor." The answer was too simple, too plain. It felt evasive. "Given to you by whom?" Evans interjected, scoffing. "Did you find it in a pawn shop? Buy it online to impress people?" Judge Holloway silenced the prosecutor with a sharp rap of his gavel. "I am asking the questions, Captain. Mr. Thorne, who gave it to you?" A long silence stretched, filling the room. Samuel's gaze drifted to the flag. "A long time ago," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "By a man who said I earned it." The ambiguity was a poison. It turned the judge's neutrality into impatience, and the crowd's suspicion into certainty. This old man was a liar. Captain Evans seized the moment, sensing the tide had turned irrevocably in his favor. He straightened his uniform, his posture a physical representation of the moral high ground he believed he occupied. "Your Honor, the regulations are clear. Army Regulation 600-8-22 governs the wear and awarding of decorations. The Distinguished Service Cross is not given by some unnamed man. It is bestowed by the President of the United States. Its recipients are a matter of public record, their citations a part of our history. I have had my aide run Mr. Thorne's name through every conceivable database. Samuel Thorne, service number, date of birth. There is no record of him ever serving, let alone performing an act of heroism that would warrant this nation's second highest honor. Evans walked back to his table and picked up a single sheet of paper, holding it up like a death warrant. What you see before you is not a soldier. He is a charlatan. A man who sweeps our floors and, in the dark, attempts to steal the honor he sees around him every day. He diminishes the sacrifice of real heroes. He cheapens their valor with his pathetic masquerade. Each word was a carefully chosen stone, hurled at the silent old man. The collective weight of the institution, of its history and its pride, seemed to press down on Samuel Thorne, a force meant to crush him. Yet, he did not break. He simply stood, absorbing the blows, his silence a mystery that was beginning to feel less like guilt and more like something else entirely. Colonel Holloway's face was grim. The evidence was damning, the defendant's answers were non-existent, and the prosecutor, though arrogant, was procedurally correct. The integrity of the uniform and its symbols had to be protected. His duty was clear. Mr. Thorne, the judge's voice was firm, stripped of any remaining warmth. This court finds your explanation insufficient and your possession of this medal deeply troubling. The charge of trespassing is a minor issue compared to this. This desecration of military honor will not stand in my courtroom. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into the old man. I am ordering you to remove that medal. Now. Take it off, and hand it to the bailiff. A collective gasp swept the room. It was the ultimate humiliation. Not a fine, not jail time, but a public stripping of a false honor. The bailiff, a burly master-at-arms, took a step forward. But Samuel Thorne did not move. His gnarled hands remained clasped behind his back. His eyes, clear and steady, met the judge's. A profound, unshakable resolve settled over him. I cannot do that, Your Honor, he said, his voice quiet but absolute. I cannot. The defiance, so gentle, so utterly unexpected, stunned the courtroom into absolute silence. It was an impasse. A battle of wills between the full force of military law and one, stubborn, silent old man. The heavy oak doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a soft whoosh, a sound that sliced through the suffocating tension. Every head turned. Framed in the doorway stood General Mark Peterson, commander of Army Forces Command. He was a four-star general, a living legend, a man whose presence instantly altered the gravity of any room he entered. He was flanked by two aides, who stood back as the general's gaze swept the scene. The entire courtroom, as if pulled by a single string, rose to its feet. Judge Holloway, a full colonel, stood ramrod straight. Captain Evans snapped to an attention so rigid it was almost a caricature. General Peterson was not scheduled to be there, his arrival was a disruption of the highest order. His eyes, accustomed to surveying battlefields and strategic maps, took in the tableau, the stern judge, the indignant prosecutor, and the stooped, silent janitor at the defendant's table. He began to walk forward, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous silence, his attention clearly focused on the judge's bench. But then, he stopped. His gaze had fallen on the defendant. He looked at the worn jacket, the tired face, and the small, tarnished piece of metal pinned just inside the lapel. The shift was imperceptible at first, then seismic. The mask of command on General Peterson's face dissolved. His stern mouth slackened. His sharp, strategic eyes widened, first in confusion, then in dawning, staggering recognition. A flicker of something profound and deeply buried passed across his features, not just respect, but a raw, unadulterated awe that bordered on reverence. He took an involuntary step back, as if struck. The courtroom watched, utterly bewildered. This was not the reaction of a commander to a disgraced janitor. This was the reaction of a pilgrim finding a lost shrine. The general turned to his aides. "Wait outside," he commanded, his voice suddenly husky. He didn't wait for their reply. He began walking again, but his destination had changed. He bypassed the prosecutor's table without a glance. He walked past the bailiff. He approached the defendant's table, his steps now slow, deliberate, almost hesitant. He stopped a few feet from Samuel Thorne, the highest-ranking officer on the continent standing before the lowest-ranking man in the room. He did not speak. He simply stared, his eyes tracing the lines on the old man's face as if trying to reconcile a ghost with the man of flesh and blood standing before him. The authority of the courtroom, once centered on the judge, had collapsed and reformed around this silent, mystifying interaction. General Peterson slowly turned to face the bench, but his eyes kept darting back to Samuel. "Colonel Holloway," the general's voice was low, yet it carried to every corner of the room. It was thick with an emotion no one could place. "Forgive my intrusion. May I have the court's permission to speak on the matter of this man?" Judge Holloway, still standing, was dumbfounded. "Of course, General," the general took a deep breath, composing himself. He did not address the charges, or the medal, not directly. Instead, he began to tell a story. 30 years ago, he began, his voice gaining strength, in a valley whose name remains classified, a small special forces outpost, call sign Vanguard, was overrun. 32 American soldiers were about to be annihilated. All communication was lost. The situation was hopeless, he paused, and the room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. Then, one man did the impossible. With the commanding officer down, this man, a sergeant, organized a defense from a collapsed bunker. For 18 hours, he moved between positions, under constant, overwhelming fire, redistributing ammunition, tending to the wounded, single-handedly repelling enemy assaults on the northern perimeter. The survivors said it was like he was everywhere at once. They called him, the ghost of Vanguard. Captain Evans stood frozen, the smug certainty draining from his face, replaced by a pale mask of confusion. The general turned his body slightly, to better see Samuel Thorne, who now stared at the floor, his jaw tight. When a relief force finally broke through, Peterson continued, his voice cracking, they found the sergeant. He had been wounded 3 times. He was the last man on his feet, holding the line with a machine gun propped on a wall of sandbags, protecting the makeshift aid station where 17 wounded men lay. He had saved them all, the general's eyes were now glistening. For this action, he was recommended for the Medal of Honor. It was downgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross only because the mission was so sensitive that no public citation could be issued. The hero's identity was buried in classified after-action reports. He refused any public ceremony. He said the real heroes were the ones who didn't make it home. He took his medal, signed his discharge papers, and vanished. He became a legend. A story we tell young officers to teach them the meaning of courage. Peterson took a final, momentous step forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with 3 decades of awe. Over the years, I have read that classified file a dozen times. I was a young lieutenant in the relief force that day. I saw him. I saw what he did. He raised a hand and pointed, not at the medal, but at Samuel Thorne's forearm, where a faded, barely visible tattoo of a winged dagger, the insignia of MACVSOG, peeked from his frayed cuff. His name is not just Samuel Thorne. He is Sergeant Samuel Thorne. He is the ghost of Vanguard. The revelation detonated in the silent courtroom. It was a blast wave of pure, unadulterated truth, and it leveled everything. Captain Evans physically staggered, his hand gripping his table for support. His face was a canvas of horror and shame. All the air went out of his lungs. Judge Holloway sank slowly into his chair, his face ashen, his eyes locked on the stooped janitor who was, in fact, a giant. The whispers in the gallery were gone, replaced by a thick, gaping silence of awe. The judge finally found his voice, a choked, broken thing. "Case dismissed," he croaked. He then rose, not as a judge, but as a humbled soldier. Sergeant Thorne, on behalf of the United States Army. I apologize, but it was Captain Evans who was the most undone. He stumbled forward, past the bailiff, his perfectly polished shoes scuffing on the floor. He stopped before Samuel, his arrogant posture gone, replaced by the supplicant's bow of a broken man. "Sergeant," he whispered, his voice cracking. I am so sorry. What I said, there is no excuse." Samuel Thorne finally looked up. He looked at the young captain, and in his eyes, there was no anger, no triumph, no resentment. There was only a deep, quiet, and infinite well of understanding. He gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "It's forgotten, son," he said softly. "We all have a duty. Yours is to protect the honor of the uniform. You were just doing your job." General Peterson stepped forward and gently placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. He helped him with his worn jacket, carefully adjusting the lapel to properly display the Distinguished Service Cross. Then, the four-star general escorted the old janitor out of the courtroom, not as a superior, but as a humble honor guard, leaving a shattered Captain Evans and a humbled Colonel Holloway to stare at the flag, their worlds, and their understanding of honor, remade forever.